It's a milestone many once considered unthinkable, but now we are here. 100,000 deaths nationwide, and even as we stop to mourn those lives lost, if we do, leaders at all levels are working to figure out how to resume life while mitigating risk. Here in Massachusetts, with the state's phased reopening underway, Governor Charlie Baker is turning his attention to a big remaining question, the plan for schools.
I feel terrible, and I know almost everybody does, about how much school our kids lost as a result of this pandemic, and I think we all believe that it's critically important that we do all we can to make sure they don't lose another half year or, God forbid, longer than that. I think we really need to work hard to make sure we come up with a workable plan.
Schools around the state have been struggling to figure out how to keep students and teachers safe, a challenge compounded by coronavirus-caused budget concerns. Many, particularly public schools in lower-income areas that have been hit hard by rising unemployment, have been hoping for a boost of federal money from the emergency coronavirus relief bill that was passed in March and included more than $13 billion of K-12 funding. But now Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is declaring that same money will be going to private schools too, regardless of income levels, meaning less money for those who need it most. It's just the latest example of how ass-backwards so much of the so-called CARES Act actually is. A cornerstone of the law, the Paycheck Protection Program, was supposed to give forgivable loans to small businesses to help get them through the pandemic, and was rolled out with plenty of fanfare from the president.
It's been flawless so far, far beyond our expectations. This has been a tremendous success.
In reality, the program has been anything but flawless, with a flood of online applications that crashed the computer systems at the Small Business Administration at least twice, and a scandal over national chains like Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse getting millions, while ma and pa's shops across the country weren't even hearing back about their applications. Ultimately, both those chains gave back the money, and Congress did add more funding. But nearly 2 months in, a lot of small businesses, minority-owned businesses in particular, still need help. A recent survey found just 12% of Black and Latino entrepreneurs who applied for aid have actually gotten what they asked for. So where's the disconnect in all that? I'm joined now by former Labor Secretary under Bill Clinton, Robert Reich. He's also worked with Presidents Ford, Carter, and Obama, and is the author of The System Who Rigged It, How We Fix It. Secretary Reich, good to see you as always.
Hi, Jim.
Is it fair to say that not just the pandemic, but $2 trillion in relief has just served to exacerbate the wealth and income gap rather than ameliorate it in this country?
Unfortunately, it is fair to say that, because you see, if you have a lot of power in Washington, if you have lobbyists and all sorts of PACs and lawyers who are working for you, chances are you get first in line. And that's exactly what's happened. In terms of the bailouts for companies, the Treasury and the Fed have organized in terms of the payroll protection plan, and even in terms of every other piece of apparatus, even unemployment. It is the people who are well-connected who are doing the best. Average workers, and particularly people of color, they are not getting what they need. They don't have those connections. They don't have that power in Washington. They don't have the lobbyists. They don't have the PACs. And it's business as usual, sadly, tragically.
You know, by the way, I had the guy who did Room Raider on TV with me the other night. I'd give you a 10 if I were in charge of that Twitter account, but that's for another day, Bob. It's looking very fine back there. So, you know, what's so depressing to me, not just when you see $1,200 for an individual, which is gone in a minute, and millions of dollars in tax breaks. The New York Times story the other day about hospitals sitting on billions and billions of dollars, got $5 billion more, while community hospitals can barely make it through the week. I'm reading a piece you wrote, and the structural disparity is so intense. I don't know how we get out of this. I think you said 3% of low-income people are able to work at home, while more than 50% of upper-middle-income people are able to work at home. That seems to be such a barrier. Even if you want to impose more equity, you almost can't.
Well, we can't say we can't. I mean, other nations are doing a far better job than we are. They are delivering unemployment checks. They're keeping people employed. They're making sure that payrolls are maintained. They're not putting the kind of burden we are putting on so-called essential workers. But essential workers in this country very often mean hospital workers and even meat packers, people who are not being protected. I mean, I used to be in charge of supervising something called the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, part of the Labor Department. OSHA in those days was concerned about the safety and health of workers. That was what the job of OSHA. These days, OSHA basically couldn't care less. It's providing advisory opinions to companies, but nevertheless, meat packers and other forms of, even the people who are working for Amazon in warehouses, other big warehouses, they're not getting the protective equipment. They're not getting the kind of safety and health regulations that they deserve in order to protect themselves and their families.
But let's talk about Amazon for a second. It's fashionable and I think appropriate to characterize the president in all this as heartless and careless and clueless. However, there's a pogo-esque aspect to this, too. I read this morning that over the 3 months of the pandemic, Jeff Bezos has made a mere $34 billion. Obviously, he's got to be able to feed his family, while he's not only doing what you're doing in talking about in terms of safety protection, he eliminated the so-called heroes bonus, that $2 an hour increase for a short period of time. And the reason he's able to do that, in my estimation, is because we're too busy on Amazon.com to complain about it.
Well, that's exactly right. And not only are we busy, but for years, we have not used antitrust laws to prevent companies like Amazon from accumulating huge power. And all of the laws and all of the mechanisms of our market are tilted more and more in the direction of the big and profitable and against average workers. And frankly, Jim, we can certainly put some of this at the feet of Donald Trump and the Trump administration, but some of it is something that's actually been evolving in the United States over many, many years, and that is the fact that with great wealth, concentrated wealth at the top, comes great power, political power, and that political power has become more and more concentrated right there among big corporations, Wall Street, a lot of wealthy individuals. And the result is that you have a pandemic that not only hurts the poor and hurts the middle class and the working class, but ends up rewarding America's billionaires with $484 billion, which they didn't have at the start of the pandemic. They are $484 billion richer now. Why is that? Well, for a whole variety of reasons, including special tax breaks that are actually inserted into laws that nobody sees.
And also, at least in my estimation, I don't know if you held more hope for this next bill when it happens. When you hear Mitch McConnell talking about providing immunity to corporations from suit, more money going to oil and gas companies, it's just going to be more of the same despite the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, is it not?
Well, it could be. Here's why I get a little bit nervous in terms of just throwing up our hands and saying, well, it's always going to be this way. There's nothing we can do. That kind of, let's call it cynical realism. I agree with skepticism. I'm skeptical. I'm as skeptical as anybody. But cynical realism gets to the point where people say, well, let's just give up. I'm not going to try to reform this monster. The system is rigged. There's nothing I can do about it. It's always going to be rigged. Well, the problem with that attitude is then the other side really wins. The American oligarchy, the richest, the biggest companies, the Amazons of the world, the Jeff Bezos of the world, and the Donald Trumps of the world, they win. And they want us to give up. They want everybody to say there's nothing we can do about it. But I refuse to accept that. We can reform, and we've done it before in our history.
Okay, so you mentioned rigged. It's the title of your damn book, The System, Who Rigged It and How to Fix It. So, Mr. Secretary, you have 60 seconds to fix it. Things that would pass the laugh test. How do we fix it?
Well, we have to get big money out of politics. That's the most important, Jim. And you say it may not pass the laugh test. Actually, the number one bill, the first bill passed by the House under Democratic control this past year, was public financing of elections, an attempt to get big money out of politics. That's really a lot of what this is all about.
What else would you do, Bob Reich?
I'd end the revolving door. I'd make it much, much harder for people in government or in business to take the jobs that really are regulatory jobs. I would make sure that people actually have an opportunity to vote. More voting is better than less voting. I would end voter suppression. I would really attack gerrymandering. I would make, in other words, our democracy the center of our attention. Because we can talk policy until we're blue in the face, Jim. But if we don't rescue our democracy from big money, then we're just talking into the wind.
Bob Reich, did you see today that the president's press secretary has voted by mail 11 times in the last 10 elections?
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, we've got to vote by mail. The president votes by mail. I mean, and it's not all this business about it being a recipe for fraud makes no sense at all. Here in California, we've had, absentee voting. It goes only to registered voters. I mean, there is no evidence of fraud. And if we have the coronavirus in November, we're going to have to do more absentee voting.
I knew that because I read the fact check on Twitter and I read your books. Bob Reich, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.